My sister screamed, "Get out!" on her 30th birthday. My mother laughed. My father just looked away. 24 hours later, I was standing barefoot on the warm stone of my $30 million Malibu estate, the Pacific Ocean roaring below. They have no idea where I went. But they will, because I kept the receipts, and I finally turned my silence into stone. Before we dive into the story, I'd love to know, where are you watching from? Drop it in the comments. I'm always curious to see how far these stories reach. Now let's get into it. For as long as I can remember, I was the quiet one, the strong, invisible daughter who held everything together while everyone else took credit. I grew up in a house where love was something my parents gave to my sister, Sloane, and responsibility was something they gave to me. When our dad lost his job, I picked up shifts at the local diner after school to keep the lights on. When Mom got sick, I was the one who stayed up through the night, making soup and cleaning. Sloane. She'd cry if asked to lift a finger. My room was the one by the pipes, the smallest, dampest corner of the house. Every morning, I'd wake to the sound of water dripping and mold creeping up the corners. Across the hall, Sloane had her bright, sunlit room with fairy lights and a balcony. Whenever guests came, my mother would beam, "Sloane's our star." As if I didn't exist 2 feet away, covered in laundry detergent and exhaustion. When I graduated valedictorian, they barely showed up. My acceptance letter to Stanford earned a shrug and a question. "But who'll take care of Sloane while you're gone?" I remember sitting in that mildew-scented room, clutching my scholarship letter, realizing my dreams were just another inconvenience to them. Still, I kept hoping they'd see me one day, that maybe my silence would prove loyalty, not weakness. Then came Sloane's 30th birthday. She was glowing in her sequin dress, surrounded by family and friends. I arrived with a small gift, a framed photo of the 2 of us as kids. She looked at it and laughed, tossing it onto the table. "You still don't get it, do you?" she sneered. "You're not wanted here. You make everything awkward." My mother giggled, her wine glass clinking. My father said nothing, eyes on the floor. The laughter stung more than any slap could. I remember standing there, the room spinning, humiliated in front of everyone. For the first time, I didn't cry. I just nodded, picked up my coat, and walked out. No goodbye. No words. Just silence. The same silence they'd always given me, but this time, it was mine to control. That night, I packed my life into a single suitcase and left town. They didn't know that the girl they dismissed had already built something of her own. A quiet empire that no one had noticed yet. And when I stepped onto the terrace of my Malibu home a day later, ocean wind in my hair, I felt something I'd never felt before, peace. My silence wasn't weakness anymore. It was power. The kind that didn't need to shout to be heard. The walls of my childhood room always smelled like damp metal and soap. Pipes ran along one side, groaning whenever someone flushed upstairs. At night, the dripping never stopped. It was a hollow, rhythmic reminder that I lived in the part of the house nobody cared to fix. The floor was always cold, and even in summer, the window barely opened because the frame had swollen from years of moisture. I'd press my palm against the peeling paint and tell myself that someday, I'd sleep somewhere that didn't sound like a leaking faucet. Across the hall was Sloane's world. Sunlight pouring through lace curtains, pink walls, a balcony where she hung wind chimes that never stopped singing. Our mother used to stand in her doorway and sigh like she was admiring art. "She's our little princess," she'd say, brushing Sloane's hair. I used to stand at my door watching, invisible in my corner, a towel slung over my shoulder from cleaning dishes or mopping floors. The difference between us wasn't just the rooms. It was how the air changed when either of us entered a space. When I came in with a report card full of A's, my father would glance at it and mumble, "Good, keep it up." But when Sloane brought home a C+ in history, they'd throw a mini celebration. "She's trying her best," my mother would say, hugging her as if effort mattered more than achievement, at least when it came from her favorite. One summer, the roof leaked directly over my bed. I dragged a bucket under the drip, but no one bothered to fix it. When I told Mom, she laughed softly. "You're tough, Nina. You can handle a little water." The next week, Dad spent an entire weekend repainting Sloane's room because she didn't like the shade of pink. I learned quickly that comfort was something earned, and in our house, love had to be begged for. But I never begged. I just worked harder, stayed quieter. School was my only escape. Teachers praised me, guidance counselors encouraged me, and I buried myself in books until the words became armor. The day I got my full scholarship letter, I ran home, heart pounding, finally thinking, this is it, they'll be proud. I placed the letter on the kitchen table, right between Mom's coffee mug and Dad's newspaper. They read it, exchanged a look, and the first thing out of Mom's mouth was, what about Sloane? Who's going to help her now? I remember standing there, speechless, watching my dreams shrink in their eyes. Dad folded the letter neatly and said, that's great, honey. Just don't forget family. Family. The word tasted sour after that. Because in our family, don't forget really meant don't leave. That night, Sloane burst into my room crying that she didn't want me to go. I hugged her, but her tears weren't about losing me. They were about losing her built-in helper. And as I looked around at the cracked walls, the rust stains, the smell of mold, I realized something that would stay with me for years. Silence wasn't just survival in that house. It was how they kept me small. When I closed my eyes that night, I could hear the pipes rattling above me, like they were whispering the truth I wasn't ready to say out loud yet. I didn't belong there, and one day, I'd never look back. The morning I left for college, the house was quiet. No hugs, no send-off, no packed lunch for the road. My suitcase bumped against the cracked steps as I dragged it out alone. Sloane was still asleep. Mom said she didn't want to wake her. Dad just muttered, drive safe, without looking up from the newspaper. The car I borrowed smelled like gasoline and goodbye. When the highway opened ahead of me, I expected to feel free. Instead, I felt hollow, like every mile between us was filled with words they never said. I told myself it didn't matter, that distance would make me stronger. But the silence followed me. At college, I blended in with the noise. My roommates were loud, carefree, full of life I didn't know how to imitate. I was the one who stayed up late in the library, memorizing code syntax and writing essays while others laughed in the quad. The quiet became my rhythm, steady, controlled. Professors noticed my focus. Classmates admired my grades. But every night, I'd check my phone, waiting for a message that never came. No, we miss you. No, how are you doing? Just bills forwarded to my email and the occasional request to help Sloane with her coursework. Graduation day came with applause that didn't belong to me. I smiled for the pictures, the borrowed cap slipping over my eyes, but in the crowd of families cheering, my section stayed empty. The only text I got was from my landlord reminding me to return the keys. I remember thinking that maybe I'd stop hoping if I buried myself deep enough in work. I accepted the first job offer that came, a small tech firm in Denver. It wasn't glamorous, but it paid enough to live quietly. The office was gray, predictable, the kind of place where people stayed in their cubicles and pretended to like the break room coffee. I kept my head down, coding for hours, taking pride in precision. My manager once said, "You never talk much, but your work speaks louder than anyone here." He meant it as praise. He didn't know it was survival. After hours, when the building emptied, I'd stay behind, opening a hidden folder on my laptop, my real work. Lines of code filled the screen, an idea I couldn't stop refining. A system that could track and analyze microtransactions in real time. It started as an experiment, something to remind myself that I could build something from nothing. Night after night, I wrote until my fingers cramped, driven by something deeper than ambition. Maybe it was the need to prove, to myself, not them, that I was capable of more than they ever believed. The janitor once asked why I stayed so late. I told him, I like the quiet. And I meant it. Silence no longer felt like punishment. It was focus, fuel. I learned to breathe through it, let it sharpen me. Months turned into years. The project grew in secret, cleaner, faster, smarter. Every successful test felt like a heartbeat returning. No applause, no validation. Just quiet progress, exactly how I'd learned to survive. Sometimes, on the walk home through the dim streets, I'd wonder if my family ever mentioned me. Maybe they assumed I was still small, still serving someone else's comfort. They didn't know that silence had taught me everything I needed, to endure, to build, and most of all, to escape without ever slamming the door. Cale came into my life like a spark, confident, charming, and everything I wasn't. He had the kind of voice that could make investors lean forward and believe. We met during a late-night debugging session, the office fluorescent lights flickering above us. He leaned over my desk, scanning my code, and said, "You've got something big here." It was the first time anyone had said those words to me without sarcasm. I didn't trust easily, but Cale had a way of making trust feel like momentum. He saw my project, the financial algorithm I'd built in silence, and offered to help turn it into a company. "You're the genius," he told me. I'll handle the front. He was persuasive, magnetic. Against every instinct, I agreed. We filed the paperwork under both our names, though he insisted on handling most of the legal side. You hate bureaucracy, he laughed. Let me deal with it. I wanted to believe him. I wanted to believe someone could see my work and not want to own it. The first few months were electric. We worked out of a shared office space that smelled of burnt coffee and ambition. He brought in investors with slick pitches. I stayed behind, refining the product that made those pitches possible. He was everywhere, networking events, podcasts, interviews, while I was behind the screen buried in code. When journalists wrote articles about our company's visionary founder, his name was always first. Mine came in parentheses, if at all. Still, I told myself it didn't matter. The code was mine, the idea was mine, and soon the world would see that. I worked 12-hour days, running on caffeine and hope. I ignored the small signs, the way he'd dodge questions about finances, the times he'd change passwords for security reasons, the legal documents he'd slide across the table with a casual. Just sign here, it's routine. Then came the meeting that changed everything. We were about to close a massive deal with a venture firm. I walked into the conference room, expecting a celebration. Instead, Cale was already seated, with a lawyer. My access to the company accounts had been revoked overnight. My email password didn't work. He slid a document toward me, his tone rehearsed and cold. It's better this way, he said. You'll still get a small payout once the acquisition goes through. I stared at the papers. My own logo stared back at me, only now, my name was gone from every line. I asked him how he could do this. He smiled, like someone explaining a math problem to a child. You didn't protect yourself. I did. It hit me then. This wasn't sudden. It had been planned, piece by piece, while I was too focused on building to notice the ground shifting beneath me. The lawyer spoke in polite legal terms, words like intellectual property transfer and non-compete clause. I barely heard them. By the time I left the building, my security badge no longer worked. The company I'd created, the code that had lived in my head for years, was now his. I walked out into the night with nothing but my laptop bag and a hollow ache where trust used to be. In the reflection of the office windows, I saw my face, calm, silent, unreadable. The same silence that once kept me safe now felt like a cage. I had handed over my creation because I believed someone finally saw me. But he didn't see me, he saw opportunity. And I realized, too late, that I'd built brilliance for someone else's spotlight. I spent the next few weeks in a daze, like someone walking through smoke after a fire. My name was erased from everything, company records, press articles, even the prototype code I had written line by line. The lawyers made it clear. The intellectual property was his. The emails were cold, final. I couldn't even access the servers I had built. Cale's charm had turned into a weapon, his smooth words now sharpened by legality and betrayal. My bank account was nearly empty. Every cent I had poured into that startup vanished with his signature. The small apartment I'd rented felt like a storage unit for failure. The air was stale, heavy with silence that no longer comforted me. For days, I didn't eat much. I'd sit by the window, watching lights flicker across neighboring buildings, wondering how many people inside were pretending they were okay too. I thought about my family more than I wanted to. The feeling was familiar, the same hollow ache I'd carried since childhood. Back then, silence was my armor. Now it felt like proof that I'd never learned to fight back. I remembered my mother's voice telling me I could handle anything, though she never helped me handle anything. I remembered Sloane's laughter echoing down the hall while I mopped the kitchen floor. I realized I had recreated that same imbalance, working in the shadows while someone else basked in the light. One night, I opened my laptop out of habit. The screen glowed, reflecting my face, pale and tired. I opened a blank document, fingers hovering over the keys, but no code came out, just thoughts, raw and unfiltered. I wrote about everything I'd lost, every boundary I never enforced, every time I chose silence over confrontation. The words blurred, but something inside me began to solidify. By dawn, the decision was made. I wasn't going to chase Cale or try to reclaim what he stole. I was done being the quiet partner, the unseen force behind someone else's glory. If silence had been my weakness once, I'd turn it into precision, focused, deliberate, unbreakable. I deleted every trace of the old project from my hard drive. Then I created a new folder, empty, unnamed. This one would be mine, completely. No partners, no shared access, no trust misplaced. I started sketching new algorithms, sharper, more adaptable than before. I wanted to build something so strong that no one could take it even if they tried. Days blurred into nights. I sold a few old possessions to keep my rent paid. Coffee replaced sleep. I stopped checking my phone for messages. The outside world felt irrelevant. Every keystroke was a promise to myself. Never again would I be the silent foundation for anyone else's empire. There were moments when exhaustion almost won, when I questioned if it was worth rebuilding from zero. But every time my mind wandered toward doubt, I pictured Kale's smirk across that conference table, the way my parents looked away when I needed them most. The same silence that once buried me now became a forge. By the time the sun rose one morning, my screen was filled with code, fresh, clean, and powerful. It wasn't revenge. It was rebirth. I didn't whisper it aloud, but in my head the vow was clear. This time, the world would never see me coming until it was too late. The money I had left was barely enough to survive, but I'd hidden a small reserve years earlier. Money saved from side projects, payments I never mentioned to anyone. That forgotten nest egg became my lifeline. I transferred every dollar into a new account under a name that meant nothing, just letters strung together to disappear in the system. No one would trace it. No one would connect it to me. I rented a workspace the size of a walk-in closet in a rundown building downtown. The carpet was torn, the walls thin enough to hear every conversation next door, but it was mine. The landlord didn't ask questions, and I didn't give answers. The lease was under a shell company I registered quietly, plain, forgettable, a name that would blend into tax filings and public records like background noise. Each day followed the same rhythm: arrive before sunrise, leave after midnight. I didn't post online, didn't attend industry events, didn't network. The tech world thrives on exposure. I thrived on invisibility. My code didn't need a face. It just needed to work. I rebuilt from the foundation, correcting every flaw I'd once ignored. Every security gap that Kale had used, I sealed. Every piece of data that had once been vulnerable, I fortified. My new platform wasn't just a version of the old one. It was evolution, pure and quiet. A financial framework capable of reading market behavior in real time, faster than anything out there. While others shouted about innovation, I whispered it into existence. I kept no trace of my identity in the files, no signatures, no metadata, nothing. Every update came from anonymous IP addresses routed through layers of encryption. The system had no fingerprints, not even mine. Some nights, when fatigue blurred my focus, I'd catch myself glancing at the old articles featuring Kale's smug grin beside what used to be my creation. The sting had dulled, replaced by something colder: resolve. He had the spotlight, but I had the blueprint. And this time, the code was unstealable. Weeks turned into months. My platform began to spread quietly, piece by piece. I sold access to select clients through encrypted channels, people who didn't care about branding, only results. The money trickled in first, small, cautious transfers from private investors who didn't ask where the product came from. Then it grew. My account balance climbed, slowly at first, then exponentially. Every number on that screen was proof that silence could build empires. I worked through birthdays, holidays, entire seasons. The window above my desk overlooked an alley, a patch of sky, and the hum of the city beyond. It was enough. My office might have been a closet, but within those narrow walls, I was limitless. There were no headlines, no interviews, no applause. That anonymity became my shield. The less they saw, the stronger I became. I was a ghost in the machine, no face, no name, no weakness. Sometimes, I'd lean back and listen to the soft hum of the servers, their steady rhythm echoing my own pulse. For the first time in my life, I didn't crave recognition. I didn't want them to see me. I wanted to move in silence, to build quietly until the noise belonged to me. And as the system began to take over markets once dominated by giants, I realized I had become what I was always meant to be. Not the shadow behind someone else's success, but the architect of my own unseen empire. Kale's empire began to crack quietly, the way glass fractures before it shatters. At first, it was small, clients complaining about system errors, investors whispering about instability. His team issued quick fixes, but the bugs kept multiplying. What he didn't understand was that his entire foundation had been built on code he never truly grasped. The version he stole was incomplete, rigid, unable to evolve. He had taken what looked finished but lacked the soul that created it. The first article appeared on a minor tech blog. A new platform disrupts market predictions. It mentioned no names, only performance metrics. numbers that humiliated his company's best results. Within weeks, larger outlets began asking questions. Investors started pulling back, hesitating before signing renewals. In conference calls, Cale tried to sound confident, but his voice carried the tremor of someone chasing shadows. Behind the scenes, my system was moving silently through the same industries his touched, outperforming every model he had ever sold. Data spoke louder than his charisma. Algorithms that once obeyed his commands were now being replaced by something faster, cleaner, and impossible to trace. I watched from my small office, reading the news like someone observing a storm they'd predicted months ago. Every headline was a quiet echo of justice. He tried to fight back, pushing updates that promised major improvements. Each release only worsened the problems. His platform froze under heavy loads, predictions failed, clients left. Within months, the company that once looked unstoppable began shedding staff. Forums filled with speculation, developers debating whether the mysterious rival was a new AI or a secret government project. Some called it the Ghost Code. Others called it the Phantom System. I smiled at the name. They weren't wrong. Cale started showing up at industry events again, desperate to prove control. His speeches grew defensive, his charm slipping into irritation. When a reporter asked about the rumored competitor, he laughed too hard, the kind of laugh that hides fear. "No one can match what we've built," he said. But his eyes told a different story, bloodshot, cornered, aware that something was closing in on him. I never reached out. I never gloated. I just watched. Watching was enough. My software's user base tripled while his collapsed. The financial markets began citing my anonymous platform as the new standard, its accuracy unmatched. And every success of mine cast another shadow over his name. The industry's gossip turned ruthless. Investors whispered that maybe Cale had lost his touch, that maybe he'd never been the genius they thought he was. They remembered his arrogance, his bragging, and slowly, admiration turned into disdain. I knew the exact day he realized who he was truly up against. He filed a patent claim accusing an unidentified entity of copying his work. The irony almost made me laugh. He was accusing a ghost of theft while forgetting he'd built his empire by stealing from one. He didn't know the truth yet. But I did. His downfall wasn't just business, it was poetic. Every failure, every lost client, every sleepless night he spent trying to catch a shadow was a debt being paid in full. And through it all, I remained invisible. The silent storm dismantling the empire he stole, one line of code at a time. The email came at midnight, a brief, formal inquiry from one of the largest investment firms in the country. They wanted a meeting with the founder of the unnamed platform disrupting the market. The message was direct, devoid of flattery, but its tone carried reverence. They didn't know my name, but they knew brilliance when they saw it. I read it twice, heart steady, mind calculating. This was the moment I had built toward in silence. I replied through my attorney, maintaining the bland corporate identity that shielded me. The meeting took place in a glass tower overlooking Los Angeles, the kind of room where empires are traded with handshakes. They had no idea the person behind the innovation was a woman who once worked from a rented storage space, building her second life line by line. They offered figures that made even my lawyer blink. Still, I said nothing. I just listened, expression unreadable. Power, I realized, wasn't in speaking, it was in silence. I laid out one condition before signing anything: complete anonymity. My name would remain off every record, every press release, every legal document. They agreed instantly, assuming I was an eccentric genius who preferred secrecy. The transaction finalized within 48 hours. $30 million. Wired. Clean. Final. No interviews. No photos. Just the quiet click of a confirmation email that ended one chapter and began another. I stared at the numbers on the screen, not in disbelief but in deep, steady satisfaction. Every betrayal, every humiliation, every smirk, they all led here. I didn't celebrate publicly. I didn't post or boast. I made one purchase, something tangible, permanent. The Malibu mansion. Oceanfront. Walls of glass. A place that stood like a whisper to the world. I made it. When I walked through its doors for the first time, sunlight spilled across the marble floors, reflecting like liquid gold. I didn't think about the house I'd been kicked out of or the boardroom where my work was stolen. I thought about freedom. I signed the closing papers under the LLC's name, not my own. Even the real estate agents never saw my face. To them, I was a quiet investor. To me, It was the final move in a long game no one else knew was being played. As the ocean roared outside, I stood on the terrace barefoot, wind tangling my hair. It wasn't about the money or even revenge anymore. It was about reclamation. The home represented something beyond success. It was proof that I could rebuild from ashes without anyone's permission. That night, the city lights shimmered far below as I opened a bottle of wine, poured one glass, and watched the tide crash against the cliffs. Cale's empire was dust now, his name fading from the industry he once ruled. Mine would never be known, but my work, my creation, was everywhere. No applause. No spotlight. Just peace. The kind that comes only after you've taken back everything they tried to destroy. Back at the house I once called home, things had changed. The walls that used to echo with laughter and superiority now carried something colder. Worry, resentment, decline. I heard through a mutual acquaintance that money was running out. My father's job had been downsized, my mother's side projects weren't enough, and Sloane's perfectly curated life had begun to crumble. The brand deals vanished, her social media full of recycled photos and forced smiles. I didn't need to see it to know it. Silence has a sound, and theirs was growing louder. One night, while scrolling the internet from my terrace in Malibu, I stumbled upon something unexpected. A gossip site had posted a distant photo of me. The headline spoke about the anonymous woman in the Malibu mansion. The picture was grainy, my face barely visible, but I knew that photo would eventually find its way to them. And it did. I imagined the scene with perfect clarity. Sloane at the same kitchen table where she used to mock my clothes, squinting at her phone. My mother leaning over her shoulder, dismissive as always. My father pretending not to care, but unable to look away. I could almost hear my mother's voice, that sharp little laugh. That can't be her. But a pause would follow, just long enough for doubt to settle in. Because they knew the posture, the stillness. They'd seen it all their lives, usually when I stood there quietly while they took turns reminding me how little I mattered. Their calls began soon after. The old number first. The one tied to a phone I'd thrown into the ocean months ago. It must have rung once before cutting off. Then again, another attempt, maybe my mother this time. Each time, they reached only my silence. The same silence they used to throw at me when I needed them most. Only now it wasn't weakness, it was my boundary. Sometimes I'd picture them together in that kitchen, pretending to move on, but unable to stop thinking about the woman on that balcony. I wondered if they noticed how the light fell across my shoulders in the picture, how peaceful I looked. I wondered if they realized that was the same light I used to dream of when I stared out the small, mildewed window of my childhood room. I never blocked their numbers. I didn't need to. They stopped calling eventually. Guilt, pride, or maybe the quiet recognition that the silence they built had finally turned against them. From my balcony, the Pacific roared beneath me, steady and endless. The world believed I'd vanished into success, but I hadn't disappeared. I'd just stopped explaining myself. They once laughed when I had nothing. Now, all they had was an echo, bouncing through the walls of that crumbling house. For the first time, my silence wasn't pain. It was power. I didn't need to show up at their door or raise my voice. That would have given them the satisfaction of thinking they still had a hold on me. Instead, I chose something quieter, something they would never be able to forget. I sent a small, perfectly wrapped package to their address. No return name, no hint of origin. Just clean ivory paper, tied with a gold ribbon. I knew my mother would open it first, curiosity outweighing pride. Inside there were 3 items. The first, a photo. Me, standing on the terrace of my Malibu home, the ocean behind me and sunlight spilling across the stone floor. I wasn't smiling. I didn't need to. The calm in my expression said everything words couldn't. The second, a printed copy of the front-page article from the business section. The headline detailed the record-breaking sale of a tech company that had shaken the financial world. My company. My work. My name printed clearly beneath the title. A quiet revelation that the invisible one they'd ignored had become someone the world noticed. The third, the old, rusted key to my childhood room. I'd kept it all these years, a reminder of the cold pipes, the smell of mildew, and the sound of their laughter from the hallway while I lay awake. It was the last piece of that house that still belonged to me, and returning it was my final act of release. No letter, no explanation. Just silence, pure, deliberate silence. The kind they once used as punishment now arrived as truth. I pictured their faces when they saw it. My mother's hand trembling slightly, my father's disbelief masked by forced indifference, Sloane's jealousy barely hidden behind confusion. There would be no yelling this time, no mocking laughter. Just realization. That night, I stood on my balcony as the sun dipped beneath the horizon. The waves crashed rhythmically against the cliffs, and for the first time, I felt no weight in my chest. No longing for acknowledgement. No anger left to burn. The silence stretched wide around me, soft, steady, powerful. The same silence that once hurt me now protected me. I had turned it into something they could never touch. They once called me weak for not fighting back. But standing there, watching the Pacific shimmer under fading light, I understood. Peace was the loudest revenge of all. Do you think I did the right thing by sending that package and walking away for good? Or should I have faced them one last time? I'd really love to hear your thoughts in the comments. And if you enjoy stories like mine, don't forget to subscribe and stay tuned.